I remember the sound that didn't belong. Not because it was loud, but because it was finally, unmistakably clear. It was a Sunday morning in late May 2023 in Dayton, Ohio. The sanctuary smelled like furniture polish and lilies. My grandson, 8 months old, wore a christening gown my mother had sewn 40 years earlier, white cotton with tiny pearl buttons down the back, hand-stitched lace at the collar, the kind of careful work that takes weeks. My husband, Deacon Martin Hale, stood beside me in his pressed suit, his hand resting lightly on the pew. Rachel, our daughter, held the baby with both arms, her face soft and tired in that new mother way, dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. The organist finished the prelude, a Bach piece, slow and stately. The audio volunteer, Paul, pressed a button to cue the baptism welcome music. And then, for 7 seconds, we all heard my husband's voice say, "I moved it until after the baptism." Not the hymn. Not the reading. Just that one sentence, coming through the speakers like a door left open in a room that was supposed to be locked. The acoustics in the sanctuary were too good. Every syllable was clear. Every word is unmistakable. Paul stopped it immediately. His face went white as candle wax. His hand shot out and hit the stop button so fast it made a clicking sound that echoed. He switched to the correct track. The hymn began, "Joyful, joyful, we adore thee," filling the space with swelling organ notes. No one shouted. No one stood up. But the air in that room changed. People shifted in their seats. Heads turned. Whispers started in the back rows like wine through leaves. I didn't look at Martin. I pressed my palm to Rachel's back, felt the warmth of her body through the cream-colored dress she'd bought for this day, and kept my eyes on my grandson's cheeks, pink, damp, perfect, completely unaware that anything had happened at all. By then, I had already known for 2 months. I had documented it in a spiral notebook hidden beneath dish towels in the kitchen drawer. I had mailed the envelope to the diocesan auditor with a return receipt requested. I had frozen the accounts at the bank, sitting in a glass-walled office with the branch manager while she typed the security codes. I had signed separation papers in an attorney's office above a dry cleaner on Main Street. But I hadn't planned what happened that morning. I had only understood the possibility. And sometimes, that's all justice needs: a small opening, a wrong file, and 7 seconds of truth that no one can take back. This is how I got there. This is what it cost. This is what I kept. Ellen Maris had lived in Dayton, Ohio, for 58 years, 34 of them married to Martin Hale. She had been born in the same hospital where her grandson would later be born, Miami Valley Hospital on the north side of the city, in the summer of 1965 when the city was still humming with manufacturing jobs and optimism. Her parents had been practical people. Her father worked as a machinist at Delco, her mother as a secretary at a law firm downtown. They had taught Ellen the value of careful record-keeping, of saving receipts, of writing things down in permanent ink. Memory fades, her mother used to say. Paper doesn't. Ellen had worked as a medical billing clerk for 32 years at the same healthcare network, starting as a file clerk at 19 and working her way up through coding, claims processing, and finally billing coordination. It was meticulous work that required attention to detail, patience with bureaucracy, and the ability to notice when numbers didn't align. She could look at a billing statement and see immediately if something was off. A charge code that didn't match the procedure, a date that fell outside the service window, an insurance claim that had been submitted twice. She had caught thousands of errors over 3 decades. She had saved the network hundreds of thousands of dollars. When she retired early at 55, they gave her a plaque and a luncheon in the conference room with grocery store sheet cake and punch. She thanked them politely, took the plaque home, and put it in a drawer. She lived in a modest 2-story house on Oakwood Avenue in the Oakwood neighborhood, a tree-lined street where the homes were built in the 1920s and 30s, solid brick structures with deep front porches and postage stamp yards. The houses were close together, the kind of proximity that meant you knew when your neighbors were having an argument or painting their trim or mowing the lawn. Ellen's house had been her parents' house. She had grown up there, married Martin in the backyard under a white tent, and inherited it when her mother died 12 years ago. Her father had died when Ellen was 23, a heart attack at 51, sudden and complete. Her mother had lived alone in that house for 33 more years, careful with money, careful with everything, saving and planning until the end. The house had hardwood floors that creaked in certain spots, plaster walls that cracked every few years, and windows that rattled in the winter. Ellen kept it clean and orderly. Every room had its purpose. The dining room held a buffet her mother had left her, dark walnut wood with brass handles that needed polishing every month. Ellen used lemon oil, rubbing it into the wood in circular motions until it gleamed. The buffet had belonged to her grandmother originally, brought over from Pennsylvania when her grandparents moved to Ohio in 1938. It held the good china, white with a gold rim, service for 12. Ellen set the dining table the same way every Sunday, white plates, folded cloth napkins, water glasses on the right, forks on the left, knives with the blades facing in. Routine had a kind of dignity to it. It asked nothing, promised nothing, and disappointed no one. Her husband, Martin, had been a deacon for 12 years and had chaired the parish finance committee for the last 6. He worked as a logistics manager at a regional supply firm called Midwest Distribution Solutions, a job that required spreadsheets, conference calls, and an ability to make decisions under pressure. He managed shipping schedules, vendor contracts, and warehouse inventories for clients across 3 states. He was good at his job, organized, articulate, dependable. He wore button-down shirts and khaki pants to work, kept his desk neat, and never missed a deadline. At home, he was quieter. He read the newspaper in the morning, watched the news in the evening, and went to bed at 10 o'clock every night without variation. At St. Timothy's Catholic Church, Martin was well regarded. He had been ordained a permanent deacon in 2011, a role that allowed him to preach occasionally, assist at Mass, and perform baptisms and funerals. He was procedural, careful, never late. The parish respected him. When the finance chair position opened in 2017, Father Luis Ortega had asked Martin to take it, and Martin had agreed. It was a volunteer role, but an important one. The finance committee oversaw all parish funds, the general operating account, the building maintenance fund, the religious education budget, and the assistance programs like the Shepherd's Fund that helped parishioners pay utility bills and buy groceries when times were hard. Martin ran the meetings with an agenda, kept minutes, and filed reports with the diocese on schedule. People trusted him. Ellen had trusted him too, in the automatic way that comes from decades of shared meals, shared bills, and shared silence. By early 2023, that trust had become something different. Not broken, exactly, but worn thin, the way fabric wears when you can see the weave underneath, when the threads start to separate and you know it won't hold much longer. They spoke in schedules. I'll be home by 6, the meeting runs until 9, can you pick up the dry cleaning? They had grown careful with each other, the way long marriages do when both people know something is off, but neither one wants to name it. Ellen had stopped asking where he'd been. Martin had stopped offering explanations. It wasn't hostility. It was the opposite, a kind of mutual retreat into routine, where neither person pressed too hard because pressing might crack the surface entirely, and neither one was ready to see what was underneath. The shift started in early March, on a Thursday afternoon. Ellen had been in the parish office at St. Timothy's, a narrow room tucked between the sacristy and the copy machine, laying out the weekly bulletin for Sunday, Massachusetts. The office was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single window that looked out onto the parking lot, a laminate desk that had been there since the 1980s, and a computer that hummed and clicked when it warmed up. The walls were painted institutional beige. A bulletin board held notices about upcoming events, the fish fry schedule for Lent, sign-ups for altar servers, a flyer about the diocesan marriage retreat. The air smelled faintly of toner, old carpet, and the lemon-scented floor wax the custodian used on Wednesdays. Ellen printed the bulletin every Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a small task, but it was hers, and she performed it the same way every week. Open the template file, update the scripture readings for the upcoming Sunday, check the announcements, Add any special intentions for the prayers of the faithful. Preview the layout. Print 60 copies on the ancient laser printer that took 5 minutes to warm up. Collate the pages. Staple twice on the left margin. Done. The bulletin was 4 pages, folded in half, and included the Mass times, the weekly readings, the music selections, and a short reflection from Father Luis. Ellen had been doing this for 7 years. It was meditative work. She liked the rhythm of it, the predictability. That afternoon, the inbox notification chimed while she was adjusting the margins on the second page. Ellen glanced at the screen. The subject line read, "Confessional Privacy Upgrade, Intercom Isolation Test Completed." The sender was the Diocesan Facilities Coordinator, a man named Robert Kellerman whom Ellen had never met, but whose name appeared on maintenance emails several times a year. Ellen opened the message. The body of the email was brief, professional, procedural. Dear St. Timothy staff, the confessional privacy upgrade has been completed as of March 7, 2023. The intercom isolation test confirmed full system separation per diocesan standards. Invoice attached for parish records. Thank you for your cooperation. Best regards, Robert Kellerman, Facilities Coordinator, Diocese of Cincinnati. Ellen read it twice. She had never heard the word intercom used in connection with the confessionals. The confessionals at St. Timothy's were traditional wooden booths, dark and cramped, with a screen between the priest's side and the penitent's side. She knew they had been renovated a few years ago, new kneelers, fresh paint, better lighting in the corridor outside, but she didn't remember anything about an intercom system. She clicked the attachment to check the invoice number for the parish financial records. The file opened. It was a standard maintenance receipt, contractor name, labor hours, parts, total cost. The total was $1,237.50. Ellen noted the invoice number in the margin of the bulletin draft and was about to close the window when she noticed something else. In the same email directory, listed just below the invoice PDF, was a small audio file. The file name was generic, ISO_test_MAR07MP3, and the file size was 41.3 megabytes. The timestamp read 11:43 post-meridium, March 7, 2023. 2 nights earlier. Late. After hours. Ellen stared at it. Her hand hovered over the mouse. The office was quiet except for the hum of the computer fan and the distant sound of someone vacuuming in the parish hall. She didn't click the file. She didn't know why, exactly. Instinct, maybe. Or caution. Or the same sense that had kept her alert during 32 years of medical billing work, the sense that told her when something was out of place even if she couldn't immediately say what or why. She closed the window, saved the bulletin draft, and sent it to the printer. The machine wheezed to life, warming up, clicking, pulling paper from the tray. Ellen stood and walked to the window while she waited. The parking lot was empty except for Father Luis's car and the maintenance van. The sky was overcast, the kind of flat gray March sky that promised rain but never delivered. The printer finished. Ellen collated the bulletins, stapled them, and stacked them neatly on the counter for the ushers to pick up on Saturday evening. Then she shut down the computer, locked the office door, and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her mind turning over the file name and the timestamp. 11:43 at night. A test recording. In a confessional. She started the car and drove home in silence, the radio off, her eyes on the road. That evening, Ellen set the table for dinner the way she always did. White plates. Folded napkins. Water glasses. Forks on the left. Knives on the right, blades facing in. She made chicken, rice, and steamed broccoli, the same meal she made most Thursday nights, because it was simple, predictable, and Martin never complained. He arrived home at 6:15, later than he'd said but not late enough to mention. He hung his coat in the closet by the front door, washed his hands at the kitchen sink using the bar of ivory soap that sat in a small ceramic dish, and sat down across from her at the dining table. They ate without speaking for the first few minutes. The only sounds were the clink of forks against plates, the scrape of a knife cutting chicken, the distant hum of the refrigerator. After a few bites, Ellen set her fork down and looked at him. "Everything settled at church for Sunday?" Martin nodded, chewing. He swallowed, took a sip of water, and said, "All under control." The phrase landed like a stone. It had a chill to it, the kind of chill that comes not from coldness, but from something rehearsed, something polished, something that had been said before and would be said again without variation. Ellen picked up her fork and took another bite of rice. She chewed slowly, methodically, watching him. His face was calm, untroubled, the same face he wore at finance committee meetings when someone asked about discrepancies in the discretionary fund or questioned a line item in the budget. He took another bite of chicken. Ellen set her fork down again and picked up her water glass. She drank slowly, feeling the cool liquid slide down her throat, and set the glass back down without making a sound. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't mention the email, or the audio file, or the timestamp, or the word intercom. She simply finished her dinner, cleared the plates, and washed them by hand even though they had a dishwasher that worked perfectly well. Martin went upstairs to change out of his work clothes. Ellen dried each dish carefully with a thin cotton towel, put them away in the cupboard, and filled the kettle for tea. She set it on the stove, turned the burner too high, and stood at the counter while the water heated. The kitchen window looked out onto the backyard, a small square of grass, a chain-link fence, the lilac bush her mother had planted 40 years ago. The bush was starting to bud, tiny green shoots appearing on the dark branches. Soon it would bloom, heavy with purple clusters, filling the yard with that thick, sweet scent that always reminded Ellen of her childhood. The kettle whistled. Ellen poured the water into a mug, added a tea bag chamomile, decaffeinated, and stood at the sink, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. A sound she hadn't heard yet was already in the room. She could feel it the way you feel pressure before a storm, the way the air gets thick and heavy, and you know something is coming even if the sky is still clear. Ellen drank her tea slowly, rinsed the mug, and dried it. Then she went upstairs. Martin was already in bed, reading something on his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in the dark. Ellen got ready for bed in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, washing her face, changing into an old t-shirt and cotton pajama pants. She climbed into bed on her side, pulled the blankets up to her shoulders, and lay facing the window. Martin turned off his phone and set it on the nightstand. The room went dark. Ellen closed her eyes, but didn't sleep for a long time. Over the next 2 weeks, Ellen began to notice other things. Small things. The kind of things that, individually, meant nothing, but together formed a pattern like lint gathering in the corner of a drawer, building slowly until you finally noticed it was there. Martin stayed later after parish meetings. He said it was to count the second collection, the envelopes parishioners put in the basket for special causes like the Diocesan Missions Fund or the Catholic Relief Services Appeal. He said it was to log the memorial donations, the money people gave in memory of deceased relatives to have their names printed in the bulletin. He said it was to update the finance spreadsheet, to reconcile accounts, to prepare reports for the diocese. Ellen didn't question it. She had no reason to. But she noticed that he often brought home manila envelopes when he returned from these late evenings, the kind used for checks and cash, the kind with metal clasps and string closures. He carried them upstairs to his office instead of leaving them on the kitchen counter where they used to go, where Ellen used to help him sort the checks and write the deposit slips. One evening in mid-March, Ellen walked past his office door on her way to the linen closet and saw him at his desk through the half-open door. The computer screen was bright in the dark room, casting a pale glow across his face. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, typing something, clicking, scrolling. Ellen knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Martin? Do you want some tea?" He minimized the window before turning around. The movement was fast, automatic, and practiced. "No thanks," he said. His smile was polite, distant, the smile you give a stranger in a checkout line. "I'm almost done here." "Okay," Ellen said. She didn't ask what he was working on. She went back downstairs, made herself a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Through the ceiling, she could hear the faint sound of typing, the creak of his desk chair, the occasional click of the mouse. She drank her tea slowly, washed the cup, and went to bed. Martin came down an hour later. She heard him brush his teeth, heard him get into bed, heard his breathing slow and even out into sleep. Ellen lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind turning over the minimized window and the quickness of his hands. The home printer history, which Ellen checked once a month to order new ink cartridges and monitor usage, showed a series of documents she didn't recognize. She had checked it on March 20th, a Monday afternoon when Martin was at work. She opened the printer settings on the home computer in the small room off the kitchen that they used as a shared office, navigated to the print queue history, and scrolled through the list. Most of it was familiar: tax documents, utility bills, parish meeting agendas, the occasional recipe Ellen had printed from a cooking website. But mixed in were other things: buyer contracts, escrow statements, property transfer forms. Ellen clicked on one. It was dated March 9th and listed an address in Montgomery County, a neighboring county about 20 miles south of Dayton. The buyer's name was someone Ellen had never heard of: Jennifer Alston. The property was a condominium. The purchase price was $195,000. Ellen stared at the screen. She scrolled down. The document was 12 pages long. It included sections on financing, closing costs, inspections, and contingencies. At the bottom of the final page was a signature line with Martin's name typed beneath it. But the signature itself was blank. The document was a draft, not a final version. Ellen closed the document without printing it. She cleared the browser history, closed the computer, and sat very still in the desk chair for several minutes. Then she stood, went to the kitchen, and wrote a note in her day planner: March 20th, property docs, Montgomery Company, buyer J. Alston, $195,000. She underlined the amount twice. Then she closed the planner and put it back in the kitchen drawer. By mid-March, Rachel had asked Ellen to babysit twice a week. Rachel was a high school counselor at Belmont High School, a sprawling building on the west side of the city where she met with students about college applications, schedule changes, and the various crises that came with being 16 and overwhelmed. Her husband, David, was a physician assistant at Kettering Health, working 12-hour shifts in the emergency department 3 or 4 days a week. Their schedules were complicated, mismatched, constantly shifting. They needed help. Ellen agreed without hesitation. But she also noticed that she felt safer at Rachel's apartment than she did in her own house. Rachel's place was small, a 2-bedroom unit on the second floor of a converted house near the University of Dayton. It was cluttered with baby things: a bouncy seat in the living room, a diaper changing station on top of the dresser, baskets of tiny clothes waiting to be folded, board books scattered across the coffee table. The air smelled like laundry detergent, apple slices, and the faint sour-sweet scent of spit-up that never quite left no matter how much you cleaned. It was ordinary in a way that felt grounding, real, uncomplicated. Ellen would sit on the couch with her grandson on her lap, watching him grab at a soft cloth book or chew on a plastic teething ring, and feel something ease in her chest that tightened again the moment she drove home. One Tuesday afternoon in late March, Ellen was folding a load of baby laundry at Rachel's kitchen table: onesies, tiny socks, washcloths the size of her palm, when her phone buzzed with a notification. She picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was an alert from her bank app: automated transfer completed, $60,000 from trust account ending in 4782 to external account ending in 9203, labeled Shepherd's Fund. Ellen set down the onesie she'd been folding. She sat down at the table, opened the app, and navigated to the trust account. The account had been opened by her mother 30 years earlier, in 1993, when Ellen was 28 and newly married. Her mother had been careful with money her entire life, saving small amounts from every paycheck, investing conservatively, building a modest nest egg that she intended to pass on. When she set up the trust, she had made Ellen the sole beneficiary and had written in the paperwork, in her careful cursive, "For Ellen, for peace of mind, for a life of her own choosing." Ellen had never touched the money. She had never needed to. She and Martin had lived comfortably on their combined incomes, and after her mother died, Ellen had simply let the account sit, earning modest interest, a safety net she knew was there but didn't think about often. Now she scrolled through the transaction history. The transfers had been set to recur automatically on the 15th and 30th of every month. They had started on January 15, 2023. By the end of March, $4,800 had been moved. Ellen stared at the numbers. She scrolled further back, checking the authorization logs. The transfer had been set up using the joint access credential, the login information that both she and Martin had because the account was technically part of their shared assets even though it was titled in her name alone. Ellen closed the app and set the phone face down on the table. She sat very still. Through the wall, she could hear Rachel in the living room, talking softly to the baby, singing a made-up song about his toes. Ellen stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the parking lot below. A few cars, a dumpster, a row of bare trees lining the edge of the property. The sky was the same flat gray it had been for days. She turned back to the table, picked up another onesie, and folded it slowly, matching the sleeves, smoothing out the fabric. Then she picked up her phone, opened the Notes app, and typed, March 28th, auto transfer $600, 15th and 30th monthly. Started January 15th, total $4,800, labeled Shepherd's Fund, not authorized. She saved the note, put the phone in her pocket, and finished folding the laundry. That night, Ellen stopped wearing her wedding ring around the house. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't throw it or hide it or say anything at all. She simply took it off while she was washing the dinner dishes, her hands covered in soapy water, the ring slipping easily over her knuckle. She dried her hands on a towel, picked up the ring, and placed it in a small ceramic dish on the windowsill above the sink. The dish was white with a blue rim, a piece of her mother's china that had chipped years ago and been relegated to holding spare change and paper clips. The ring sat there, a simple gold band, worn smooth after 34 years. Ellen looked at it for a moment, then turned back to the dishes and finished washing. The ring stayed in the dish for 3 days before Martin noticed. They were eating breakfast on a Saturday morning, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, when he looked across the table and said, "Where's your ring?" Ellen glanced at her left hand, then back at him. The band was catching on things. Martin frowned. Catching on what? Dish towels. The edge of the sink. My sweater, Ellen said. She took a bite of toast. I thought I'd give my finger a rest for a few days. Martin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and went back to his eggs. He didn't ask again. Ellen finished her breakfast, cleared the plates, and washed them in silence. The ring stayed in the ceramic dish. By early April, the signs had multiplied into something Ellen could no longer ignore or dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. Martin's absences had developed a rhythm late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, gone for several hours on Saturday mornings, phone calls taken outside or in the car with the door closed. When Ellen asked where he'd been, his answers were vague, general, always about church business. Helping with parish inventories. Meeting with vendors about the roof repair project. Coordinating the spring fundraiser. Counting the donations from the Lenten fish fries. Ellen didn't argue. She didn't press. She simply began to write things down. She bought a spiral-bound notebook from the drugstore on Wayne Avenue, the kind with a plain black cover and 100 ruled pages, the kind students used for class notes. She kept it in the kitchen drawer beneath the stack of dish towels, where Martin would never think to look because he never touched the dish towels or opened that drawer or helped with any of the small domestic tasks that kept the house running. Each evening after Martin went upstairs or left the house, Ellen took out the notebook and recorded the day's details in her small, precise handwriting. She used black ink, wrote the date at the top of each entry, and noted times, amounts, and locations. April 2nd, said meeting until 9 p.m., arrived home 10:47 p.m., envelope in briefcase. April 5th, bank alert, $600 transfer, Shepherd's Fund. April 7th, printer history shows escrow doc, Montgomery Company, dated April 3rd. April 10th, call taken outside, 18 minutes, said it was a vendor. She didn't speculate. She didn't write her suspicions or her fears or her anger. She wrote only what she could verify, what she had seen or heard or documented with her own eyes. Dates, times, amounts, locations. The facts and nothing but the facts. Every few days, she would photograph a receipt or a document or a bank statement with her phone, making sure the timestamp was visible in the corner of the screen, and save the image to a password-protected folder she'd created. The folder was labeled Medical Records because she knew Martin would never open anything related to healthcare. He had always left that to her, the bills and the insurance claims and the explanations of benefits. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. Not Rachel. Not her sister who lived in Columbus. Not her friend Joyce from the church choir. She simply kept the notebook, made the notes, and waited. On April 11th, a Tuesday, Ellen found a receipt in Martin's coat pocket. It was an accident. She had been taking the coat to the dry cleaner along with several other items, checking the pockets for loose change or tissues or anything that might cause a problem in the cleaning process. The receipt was folded in half, tucked into the inside breast pocket. Ellen unfolded it. It was from a restaurant called Artisan's Table, a place downtown that Ellen had read about but never been to, the kind of restaurant with small plates and wine pairings and prices that made you think twice. The receipt was dated Saturday, April 8th. The total was $163.47. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 2 desserts. The tip had been generous. $30, calculated at just over 18%. Ellen stared at the receipt. April 8th. Last Saturday. Martin had told her that morning he was going to help inventory the parish storage room, that Father Luis needed volunteers to organize the old vestments and ritual vessels that had been accumulating for decades. He had left at 9 in the morning and returned at 3 in the afternoon. Ellen had been at Rachel's babysitting. She hadn't questioned his story. Now she stood in the bedroom, holding the receipt, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. She took out her phone and photographed the receipt on the bedspread, making sure the date and total and items were clearly visible. Then she folded it exactly as it had been, put it back in the coat pocket, and took the coat to the dry cleaner. That evening, she opened her notebook and wrote, April 11th receipt, Artisan's Table, April 8th. $16,347, 2 entrees. Said he was at church inventory 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. She underlined 2 entrees and closed the notebook. On April 13th, a Thursday, Ellen stayed after printing the bulletin to check something. The parish office had a filing cabinet in the corner that held publicly available records, budget summaries, fundraiser results, assistance program logs. It was part of the diocese's transparency policy, a way to show parishioners that their donations were being used appropriately. Ellen opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder labeled Shepherd's Fund 2023. Inside were photocopied logs, handwritten in various people's handwriting, documenting each disbursement from the fund. Recipient name, date, amount, purpose. The entries were straightforward. January 19th, Martinez family, $2.50. Electric bill assistance, January 24th, Thomas, R, $1.80. Groceries, February 2nd, Johnson family, $300. Water bill plus gas bill. February 15th, Williams, S, $150. Prescription copays. Ellen read through every entry from January through mid-April. She added up the amounts. The total disbursed according to the logs was $7,200. Then she took out her phone and opened the Notes app where she'd been tracking the transfers from her trust account. $600 on the 15th and 30th of every month since January 15th. By April 15th, the total transferred would be $5,400. The numbers didn't match. The amounts didn't align. The transfers from her account were supposedly going to the Shepherd's Fund, but the fund's own logs showed that the money wasn't reaching the people it was supposed to help. Ellen photographed every page of the log, making sure the dates and amounts were clear. Then she closed the folder, put it back in the drawer, and locked the office. She walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and wrote in her notebook, April 13th, Shepherd's Fund logs don't match trust transfers. Fund disbursed $7,200 Jan-April. Trust transferred $5,400. Money not going to recipients. That evening, Ellen sat at the dining room table with her notebook open in front of her. She had filled 12 pages since April 2nd. The entries were clean, factual, chronological. The pattern was undeniable. She read through them slowly, one by one, as if she were reviewing a billing statement at work, checking for errors or inconsistencies. But there were no errors. There were only facts. Transfers. Receipts. Phone calls. Late nights. Documents. Amounts that didn't match. A pattern that pointed in one direction. Ellen closed the notebook, placed it back in the drawer beneath the dish towels, and stood at the sink for a long time, her hands resting on the edge of the counter, her eyes on the darkening yard. The lilac buds were larger now, starting to show purple at the tips. In another week, they would bloom. The air would fill with that thick, sweet scent. Spring was coming, and Ellen was done pretending not to notice. She dried her hands, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs. Martin was already in bed, lying on his back with his reading glasses on, scrolling through something on his phone. Ellen got ready for bed in the bathroom, taking her time, brushing her teeth with slow, deliberate strokes, washing her face with warm water, staring at herself in the mirror. Her face looked the same as it always had, a few more lines around the eyes, a few gray hairs at the temples, but still recognizably her. Still Ellen. Still the woman who had spent 34 years in this house, in this marriage, building a life. Except now that life had a crack running through it, and Ellen could see all the way down to the bottom. She climbed into bed on her side, pulled the blankets up to her shoulders, and lay facing the window. Martin turned off his phone and set it on the nightstand. The room went dark. Ellen closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, who had been careful with money her whole life, who had saved and planned and written that trust in her own hand so that Ellen would have something no one could take from her. And now someone was taking it. Someone she had trusted. Someone who slept 2 feet away, breathing softly in the dark as if nothing at all were wrong. Ellen didn't cry. She didn't feel sad, exactly. She felt something colder than sadness, something that settled in her chest like a weight she could carry without effort, the knowledge that she was done. Done pretending. Done waiting. Done hoping things would somehow return to what they'd been. They wouldn't. They couldn't. And that was fine. She had documentation now. She had proof. And she would use it. The next morning, a Friday, Ellen woke early. Martin was still asleep. Ellen dressed quietly, went downstairs, and made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window with her hands wrapped around the warm mug, watching the sun come up over the roofline of the house next door. The light was pale, tentative, the kind of early spring light that promised warmth but didn't quite deliver. Ellen finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, and picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Rachel's number and pressed call. Rachel answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," Ellen said. "I'm sorry to call so early. I need you to do something for me." There was a pause. Ellen could hear the baby making soft noises in the background, the rustle of blankets. "Okay, what do you need?" "I need your full legal name," Ellen said. "Yours, David's, and the baby's. Full names and dates of birth." Another pause, longer this time. "Why?" Ellen had anticipated this question. She had practiced the answer while she'd been standing at the window. "I'm updating a life insurance policy. A small one. I want to make sure you and the baby are listed as beneficiaries. It's just prudent." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is something wrong?" "No," Ellen said. "I'm just being careful." Rachel gave her the information. Ellen wrote it down on the back of an envelope, full names, middle names, birth dates, spelled out clearly. "Thank you," Ellen said. "I'll let you go." "I'm sorry I woke you." "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" Rachel asked. "I'm sure," Ellen said. "I'll see you Tuesday for babysitting." Ellen hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the names she'd written. Then she folded the envelope, put it in her purse, and went upstairs to get dressed for the day. She had an appointment at 9:30. The law office of Margaret Foss was located above a dry cleaner on Main Street in downtown Dayton, in a building that had been converted from retail space decades ago. The stairs were narrow and steep, the carpet worn, the walls painted a neutral tan. At the top of the stairs was a single door with a frosted glass panel that read Margaret Foss, Attorney at Law, Family and Estate Planning. Ellen knocked twice and entered. The office was small and plain. 2 chairs sat across from a simple desk. A bookshelf along one wall held legal volumes, their spines faded and cracked with age. A single window looked out onto Main Street below, where morning traffic moved slowly past. Margaret Foss was sitting at the desk, reviewing a document. She was in her early 60s, with short gray hair cut in a practical style, steel-rimmed glasses, and a navy cardigan over a white blouse. She looked up when Ellen entered and stood, extending her hand. "Mrs. Maris?" "Yes," Ellen said, shaking her hand. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course." "Please sit." Margaret gestured to one of the chairs. Ellen sat, setting her purse on the floor beside her. Margaret sat back down behind the desk, folded her hands, and looked at Ellen with calm, steady eyes. "You said on the phone you needed help with a beneficiary policy." "Yes," Ellen said. She took the envelope out of her purse and handed it to Margaret. "I want to set up a small life insurance policy. $50,000. I want my daughter, her husband, and their son to be the only beneficiaries. No one else." Margaret took the envelope, opened it, and read the names Ellen had written. Rachel Maris Lowell, David Lowell, Henry James Lowell. "And you want them listed as co-beneficiaries, equal shares?" "Yes," Ellen said. Margaret made a note on a legal pad. "Does your spouse know about this?" "No," Ellen said. Margaret looked up. "Does he need to?" "No," Ellen said. Margaret set the pen down. "Are there any shared assets we need to be aware of?" "Joint accounts, jointly titled property." "Yes," Ellen said. "But I'm separating them." Margaret studied her for a moment. Her expression didn't change, but Ellen could see the shift in her eyes, the way they sharpened, the way they became more focused. "Are you planning to file for divorce?" "Not yet," Ellen said. "But I'm preparing." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's wise. Legal separation first, if needed. Clean documentation. Asset protection." She leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask what prompted this?" Ellen hesitated, then said, "Financial misuse. From a trust account my mother left me. Transfers I didn't authorize." Margaret picked up the pen again. "How much?" "Almost $5,000 so far," Ellen said. $600 twice a month since January. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes," Ellen said. "Bank statements. Screenshots. Transaction logs." "Good," Margaret said. "Keep them. Make sure the timestamps are visible. Photos, screenshots, originals if possible. Don't alter anything. Don't delete anything. Just document." "I have been," Ellen said. Margaret made another note. "Let me draft the beneficiary policy for you. You'll have it by next Friday. If you decide to move forward with separation or divorce, come back and we'll discuss next steps. In the meantime, I'd recommend freezing any joint accounts or shared assets if you can." "I'm doing that today," Ellen said. Margaret looked at her with something that might have been approved. "You're being very methodical about this." "I'm a medical biller," Ellen said. "I notice when numbers don't match." "That's a good skill to have right now," Margaret said. She stood, and Ellen stood with her. They shook hands again. "I'll call you when the policy is ready." Ellen left the office, descended the narrow stairs, and walked out onto Main Street. The air was cool, the sky still overcast. She got into her car and drove directly to her bank, First National on 3rd Street, a solid brick building that had been there since the 1920s. She parked in the lot behind the building and walked through the side entrance. The branch manager, Linda Cho, met her in a small glass-walled office off the main lobby. Linda was in her 50s, Korean-American, with black hair cut to her shoulders and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had handled Ellen's accounts for over a decade, had helped her when her mother died, and had walked her through the trust transfer process. Ellen trusted her. They shook hands, and Linda gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Ellen, good to see you. What can I help you with today?" Ellen sat down, took out her phone, and opened the banking app. She turned the screen toward Linda. "I didn't authorize these transfers." Linda leaned forward, putting on her reading glasses. She scrolled through the transaction history Ellen had pulled up, the list of automated transfers, each one $600, each one labeled Shepherd's Fund, each one dated the 15th or 30th of the month. Linda's expression remained neutral, professional. "This is from your trust account." "Yes," Ellen said. "The account my mother set up for me. It's titled in my name, but there's joint access because it's considered marital property. The transfers were set up without my knowledge or consent." Linda scrolled further, then tapped the screen to pull up the authorization details. Automated transfer. Established January 14th. Authorization code matches the secondary joint access credential on file. "My husband," Ellen said. Linda looked up. "Yes." Ellen took the phone back. "I want the account frozen. Immediately. And I want the joint access removed. And I want to dispute the transfers and request a reversal." Linda was quiet for a moment, studying Ellen's face. Then she nodded. "We can do that. I'll freeze the account pending investigation. You'll need to sign a dispute form, and we'll open a formal investigation into the authorization. If we determine the transfers were made without your knowledge and against your will, we can reverse them and remove the joint access permanently. It usually takes 10 to 15 business days." "Do it," Ellen said. Linda pulled up the account on her computer, typed quickly, and turned the screen toward Ellen. "Sign here, here, and here." Ellen signed 3 times, her handwriting clear and steady. Linda printed a confirmation page, stamped it with the bank seal, and handed it to Ellen. "You'll receive a follow-up letter within 10 business days. If you need anything else, or if there are any problems, call me directly. You have my cell number." Ellen folded the page carefully and put it in her purse. "Thank you, Linda." "Of course," Linda said. Then, more quietly, "Are you okay, Ellen?" Ellen looked at her. "I will be." Linda nodded. They stood, shook hands again, and Ellen left the bank. She sat in her car in the parking lot for several minutes, her hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling something shift inside her. The account was frozen. The transfers had stopped. The policy was being set up. The documentation was clean. She had not raised her voice. She had not made threats. She had simply stopped allowing things to continue as they were. And in that moment, sitting in a parking lot on a Friday morning in April, Ellen felt something she hadn't felt in months: control. She started the car and drove home. Martin's car was gone. He was at work. Ellen unlocked the front door, went inside, and walked through the quiet house. She stood in the dining room for a moment, looking at her mother's buffet, the dark wood gleaming with lemon oil. She thought about her mother's careful handwriting on the trust document. For Ellen, for peace of mind, for a life of her own choosing, Ellen had peace of mind now, not because everything was fine, but because she knew exactly what was wrong and she was doing something about it. She went upstairs to the small office, opened the shared computer, and checked the printer history again. There were 3 new documents from the previous evening, all time-stamped between 8:30 and 9:15, all saved to a subfolder Martin had created called MC Property. Ellen opened the folder. There were 7 documents inside: purchase agreements, inspection reports, financing applications, title searches. All of them were for properties in Montgomery County. 3 different addresses. Purchase prices ranging from $185,000 to $210,000. Ellen read through each one carefully. 2 of the properties were condominiums. 1 was a single-family home. The buyer on all 3 documents was listed as M&J Holdings LLC. Ellen had never heard of M&J Holdings. She closed the documents, opened a web browser, and searched for M&J Holdings LLC Ohio. The search returned several results, but none of them seemed related to Martin. She tried M&J Holdings LLC Montgomery County, nothing. She tried M&J Holdings LLC Business Registration Ohio. The search returned a link to the Ohio Secretary of State Business Entity Database. Ellen clicked it, navigated to the search function, and entered M&J Holdings LLC. 1 result appeared. The business had been registered on December 15, 2022. The registered agent was listed as Martin J. Hale, 412 Oakwood Avenue, Dayton, Ohio, 45419. Ellen stared at the screen. 412 Oakwood Avenue. Her address. Her house. Martin had registered a business, an LLC, using their home address, and he hadn't told her. She scrolled down. The business purpose was listed as real estate investment. The filing date was December 15th. 4 months ago. Right before the transfers from her trust account had started. Ellen took a screenshot of the business registration, saved it to her encrypted folder, and closed the browser. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, April 14th, M&J Holdings LLC, registered December 15th, 2022, agent, Martin Hale, purpose, real estate investment, 3 properties in MC, total approximate $580,000. M&J equals Martin and Jennifer. She underlined the last question twice, then closed the notebook and put it away. That afternoon, Ellen returned to the parish office to print the bulletin. It was Thursday, 2 o'clock, her usual time. The office was empty. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and sat down at the computer. The maintenance email from March was still in the inbox. Ellen navigated to the file directory, opened the folder labeled Maintenance, March 2023, and stared at the audio file. ISO_test_MAR07 MP3, 41.3 megabytes. 34 minutes and 12 seconds. The timestamp, 11:43 post-meridium. Ellen had not listened to it yet. She had noted its existence, had documented the file path, had mentioned it in passing to no one. But she had not pressed play. Now she sat in the quiet office, the computer humming softly, the afternoon light slanting through the window, and thought about what she would hear if she listened. She thought about confessionals, about privacy, about recordings that weren't supposed to exist. She thought about her husband's voice and what he might have said in a booth late at night when he thought no one was listening. Ellen put on the headphones that hung on a hook beside the desk. They were old, over-ear style, with cracked foam padding and a coiled cord. She adjusted them, turned the volume down low, and clicked the file. There was a brief silence, then the hiss of dead air, then a rustling sound like fabric against a microphone, then a throat clearing, then Martin's voice. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Ellen's hands went flat on the desk. She sat very still. The voice continued. It was Martin's voice. There was no question. The cadence, the tone, the slight hesitation before certain words. It was him. He spoke about boundaries crossed. He spoke about cash advances to keep peace. He spoke about a woman who understood him better than his wife. He spoke about the weight of appearances and keeping things calm until after the baptism. He mentioned moving funds temporarily from a designated account to cover short-term needs until after the baby's baptism, when things would settle. He described feeling trapped between two worlds and trying to do the right thing without hurting anyone. He never used Ellen's name. He never used any other name. But the dates he mentioned matched the transfers. The amounts he alluded to matched the account activity. And the timeline after the baptism was now next month, April 30th. Ellen listened to the entire recording. 34 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, she sat in silence for a long time, the headphones still on, her hands still flat on the desk. Then she took off the headphones, set them gently on the desk, and wiped them down with a disinfectant wipe from the box on the shelf because she needed to do one clean act, one thing that made sense. She didn't cry. She didn't feel shocked exactly. She felt a kind of cold clarity, the same clarity she'd felt years ago at work when she'd discovered a billing error that had been running for months, hidden in plain sight, costing the network thousands of dollars. The error had been simple once you knew to look for it. And this was simple too. Martin had confessed. Not to her, but to someone, to himself, to God, to whoever listened on the other side of that screen. And someone, maybe the contractor, maybe the maintenance staff, maybe the system itself, had recorded it. I had saved it. Had left it in a folder where Ellen could find it. She closed the file. She didn't copy it. She didn't download it. She didn't email it to herself or save it to a flash drive or do anything that might compromise the chain of custody or make it seem like she had altered or stolen evidence. She simply took out a sticky note from the drawer, wrote down the file path maintenance, March 2023, ISO_test_MAR07MP3, and folded the note in half. Then she opened her notebook and made a single entry, April 14th, audio file confirmed. 34 minutes 12 seconds. Statements re: funds, transfers, woman, baptism timeline, keeping peace. File path recorded. She locked the office, walked to her car, and sat in the driver's seat with the windows down, breathing the cool April air. The recording existed. She had heard it. She knew what it contained. And now she needed to decide what to do with that knowledge. By the time Ellen drove home, she had made her decision. She would not confront Martin. She would not play the recording for him, would not demand explanations, would not give him a chance to explain it away or minimize it or promise to change. She would not warn him. She would simply continue what she had started, documenting, protecting, preparing. And she would notify the proper authorities. Not for revenge. Not for satisfaction. But because that recording existed on parish property and it contained statements about the misuse of parish funds, the diocese had a right to know. That evening, Ellen sat at the dining room table with a single sheet of plain white paper and a pen. Martin was upstairs, supposedly working. Ellen could hear the faint sound of his keyboard, the occasional creak of his chair. She thought carefully about what to write, about how much to say, about the difference between reporting and accusing. She wanted to be clear without being inflammatory. She wanted to provide information without providing interpretation. After several minutes, she began to write in her neat, precise handwriting. To the Office of the Auditor, Diocese of Cincinnati. I am writing to bring to your attention the existence of an audio file on the computer system at St. Timothy's Catholic Church in Dayton, Ohio. The file is located in a folder labeled Maintenance, March 2023, and is named ISO_test_MAR07MP3. The file was created on March 7, 2023, at approximately 11:43 post-meridium, and appears to be a recording made during a confessional privacy test conducted by diocesan maintenance staff. I became aware of this file while performing my volunteer duties in the parish office. I have listened to the recording once in its entirety. Based on the content, the file appears to contain statements made during a sacramental confession. While I understand that the recording was likely unintentional and part of a system isolation test, the content includes what may be admissions of financial misconduct related to the transfer of funds from designated parish assistance accounts. I am submitting this notice in accordance with diocesan transparency standards and out of concern for the proper handling of parish financial records. I have not altered, copied, or distributed this file in any way. I am requesting that the diocesan auditor review this file and take whatever action is appropriate under diocesan policy. I am available to answer any questions or provide any additional information that may be helpful to this review. Respectfully submitted, Ellen Maris, Parish Volunteer, St. Timothy's Catholic Church. Date, April 18, 2023 inch. Ellen read through the letter 3 times, making sure the tone was appropriate, the facts were correct, and the language was careful. Then she copied the text onto a fresh sheet of paper in case the first draft had any smudges or errors. She signed it at the bottom, folded it in thirds, and placed it in a white business envelope. She addressed the envelope in her clear handwriting, Office of the Auditor, Diocese of Cincinnati, 100 East 8th Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. Attention! Confidential financial review. The next morning, a Friday, Ellen drove to the post office on Maple Street. It was a small brick building with a flagpole out front and a parking lot that was always half empty. She parked, walked inside, and stood at the counter. The clerk, a man in his 60s named Harold, whom Ellen had known for years, looked up. "Morning, Ellen. Help you with something?" "I need to send this certified mail," Ellen said, placing the envelope on the counter. "Return receipt requested." Harold took the envelope, weighed it on the scale, and printed the certified mail label. $16.43, he said. Ellen paid with cash. Harold stuck the label on the envelope, stamped it, and handed Ellen the receipt. Should be there Monday or Tuesday. Thank you, Ellen said. She took the receipt, folded it into her wallet, and walked out. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the spring sunshine, feeling the warmth on her face, the cool breeze moving through the trees. The envelope was gone. The letter was in motion. The process had started. And Ellen felt a strange kind of peace, not because she knew what would happen next, but because she had done what needed to be done. She had reported the facts. She had followed the procedure. She had acted in good faith. The rest was out of her hands. She got into her car, drove home, and made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the warm mug, looking out at the yard. The lilacs were in full bloom now, heavy with purple clusters, their scent drifting through the open window. Every spring, they bloomed. Every spring, they returned. Ellen finished her tea, washed the cup, and went upstairs. She had made her move. Now she would wait and see what happened next. The call came on April 27th, a Thursday morning. Ellen was in the parish office, printing the weekly bulletin, when her cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a Cincinnati number she didn't recognize. Ellen answered. Hello, Mrs. Maris? The voice was male, calm, and professional. This is Father Luis Ortega. Do you have a moment? Ellen set down the bulletin draft. Of course, Father. There was a pause. I received a call this morning from the diocesan office. They're sending an auditor tomorrow. Financial review. They said it's routine, but the timing feels sudden. Another pause. Ellen, do you know anything about this? Ellen had been expecting this call, but hearing it still made her heart rate increase slightly. She took a slow breath. I mailed a letter. What kind of letter? A notice, Ellen said. About an audio file on the parish computer. A file from a confessional privacy test in March. It contained statements that might be relevant to parish financial records. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Father Luis said, very quietly, did you listen to it? Yes, Ellen said. And? It mentions transfers, Ellen said. From the Shepherd's Fund. Timing that matches other financial activity. The voice is familiar. Another pause. Then, your husband. Yes, Ellen said. Father Luis let out a slow breath. Ellen, I'm very sorry. You don't need to be, Ellen said. I wrote the letter because the file exists and because the diocese has a right to know. The auditor will decide what it means and what action, if any, is appropriate. I understand, Father Luis said. He sounded tired. The auditor arrives tomorrow at 10. I'll be here. Martin will be notified as finance chair. If you need anything, any support, any help, please let me know. I'll be fine, Ellen said. But thank you, Father. She hung up and sat at the desk for a long moment, her hands resting on the closed bulletin draft. The audit was coming. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours. The baptism was Sunday, 2 days after that. Everything was converging. Ellen stood, finished printing the bulletin, stacked the pages on the counter, and locked the office. Then she went home and waited. That evening, Martin came home at his usual time, 6:15. Ellen had made dinner, baked chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans. They ate in silence, as they had been eating for weeks. After a few minutes, Martin set down his fork and looked at her. I got a call from Father Luis today. Ellen looked up. Oh, there's an auditor coming tomorrow, Martin said. Diocesan financial review. Did you know about this? Ellen met his eyes. Yes. Martin's face tightened. Did you have something to do with it? I wrote a letter, Ellen said calmly. I informed the diocese about an audio file on the parish computer. A file that contains statements about financial transfers. Martin stared at her. You listened to it? Yes, Ellen said. Ellen, that was private. It was on a shared parish system, Ellen said. And it mentioned funds from accounts you manage. The diocese has a right to review it. Martin pushed his chair back from the table. You don't understand what you're doing. I think I do, Ellen said. This is going to cause problems, Martin said. His voice was rising slightly, strange showing for the first time. Big problems. For me. For the parish. Then you should have thought about that before you moved money from my mother's trust, Ellen said. Her voice was still calm, still measured, but there was steel in it now. "Before you set up transfers without my knowledge. Before you registered an LLC using our address. Before you spent $600 of my money twice a month for 4 months." Martin's face went pale. "How do you know about?" "I checked the accounts," Ellen said. "I froze the trust. I documented everything. I've been documenting for weeks, Martin. Dates. Amounts. Receipts. I have photos. I have screenshots. I have bank statements. I have printer logs. I have a notebook with 23 pages of entries. And I have an attorney." Martin sat down slowly. "Ellen." "Don't," Ellen said. She stood and began clearing the plates. "The auditor is coming tomorrow. The baptism is Sunday. Whatever happens after that is up to you and the diocese. But I'm done pretending I don't know what's been going on." She carried the plates to the sink and began washing them. Behind her, she heard Martin stand, heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the door to his office close. Ellen finished the dishes, dried them, and put them away. Then she went to the living room, sat on the couch, and opened a book. She didn't read it. She just sat there, holding it, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The next morning, April 28th, Ellen woke early. Martin was already up, showering, getting ready for the day. Ellen made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over the neighbor's roof. The light was clear and bright, the sky a pale blue. Spring had finally arrived. Ellen drank her coffee slowly, rinsed the mug, and got dressed. Martin left for work without saying goodbye. Ellen waited until his car was gone, then drove to the church. She arrived at 9:45. The parking lot was nearly empty, just Father Luis's car and the custodian's van. Ellen parked near the side entrance, walked to the parish office, and unlocked the door. Father Luis was already inside, sitting at the desk with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up when she entered. "Morning, Ellen." "Morning, Father," Ellen said. They sat in silence for a few minutes, waiting. At exactly 10 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man got out, tall and lean, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a dark suit and carried a briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of use. He walked to the office entrance, knocked once, and entered. Father Luis stood. "Mr. Venn?" "Yes," the man said. He extended his hand. "Thomas Venn, Diocesan Financial Auditor. Thank you for accommodating me on short notice." They shook hands. Thomas turned to Ellen and nodded politely. "Mrs. Maris?" "Yes," Ellen said. "Thank you for your letter," Thomas said. His voice was calm, neutral, entirely professional. It was very helpful and very clear. He set the briefcase on the desk, opened it, and pulled out a legal pad and several file folders. He sat down at the computer, powered it on, and waited for it to load. Father Luis stood near the door. Ellen stood near the window, her hands clasped in front of her, watching. Thomas navigated through the file system methodically. He opened the finance records first, spreadsheets, ledgers, account summaries, monthly reports. He scrolled through them carefully, making notes on the legal pad in small, precise handwriting. He spent nearly an hour on the finance files alone, cross-referencing accounts, checking totals, and comparing entries. Then he opened the maintenance folder. He found the audio file immediately. He clicked on it, put on headphones, and began to listen. Ellen couldn't hear what he was hearing, but she could see his face. It remained entirely expressionless. He didn't react. He didn't show surprise or concern or judgment. He simply listened, making occasional notes on the legal pad, checking the timestamp against a separate document, pausing the recording twice to write something down. When it ended 34 minutes and 12 seconds later, he removed the headphones, set them on the desk, and made one final note. Then he turned to Father Luis. "I'll need copies of all bank statements for parish-managed accounts from January 1st through today, particularly the Shepherd's Fund and any other assistance or discretionary accounts." Father Luis nodded. "I can get those from the bank. It might take a day or 2 inch. "That's fine," Thomas said. "I'll also need to see the assistance disbursement logs for the same period." "We keep those in the filing cabinet," Father Luis said. He walked to the cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder Ellen had looked at 2 weeks earlier. He handed it to Thomas. Thomas opened it and began reading through the logs, comparing them to something on his legal pad. After several minutes, he looked up. "These amounts don't match," Thomas said quietly. "What do you mean?" Father Louis asked. Thomas turned the log toward him. "The Shepherd's Fund shows total disbursements of $7,200 from January through mid-April. But according to the bank records I can access through the diocesan system, the account received $11,400 in deposits during the same period. That's a discrepancy of $4,200. Father Louis's face went pale. "Where did it go?" "That's what I need to determine," Thomas said. He made another note, closed the folder, and turned to Ellen. "Mrs. Maris, may I ask you a few questions?" "Of course," Ellen said. "The letter mentioned transfers from a trust account. Was that account in your name?" "Yes," Ellen said. "My mother set it up for me. It's titled in my name, but there was joint access because it's considered marital property. And the transfers were made without your knowledge." "Yes," Ellen said. "I discovered them in late March. I froze the account in mid-April." Thomas nodded. "Do you have documentation of those transfers?" "Yes," Ellen said. "Screenshots, bank statements, transaction logs. I can provide copies." "Please do," Thomas said. "You can email them to the diocesan office." "The address is on my card." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Ellen. "Thank you for submitting the notice. This kind of transparency is exactly what our policy is designed to encourage." Ellen took the card and nodded. Thomas turned back to Father Louis. "I'll be here for another few hours reviewing the files. I'll need to speak with your finance chair, Deacon Hale, at some point, probably early next week. I'll be in touch." Father Louis nodded. Thomas returned to the computer. Ellen quietly left the office, walked to her car, and drove home. The audit had begun. The process was in motion. She had done her part. Now she would wait and see what the diocese decided to do. That evening, Martin came home late. It was after 9 when Ellen heard his car pull into the driveway. She was sitting in the living room, reading. Martin came in through the front door, set his briefcase down heavily, and stood in the doorway looking at her. His face was drawn, exhausted. The auditor was at the church all day. "I know," Ellen said, not looking up from her book. "Father Louis called me this afternoon," Martin said. "He told me about the file. About what you did." Ellen closed the book and looked at him. "What I did was report the existence of a file that contains statements about financial misconduct. I didn't create the file. I didn't record it. I didn't put your voice on it. I just informed the appropriate authority that it existed." Martin walked to the couch and sat down heavily. "Ellen, this is going to ruin everything." "You ruined it," Ellen said quietly. "When you moved money from my account. When you registered that LLC. When you took transfers from the Shepherd's Fund. I didn't do any of that." "You did." "I was going to pay it back," Martin said. His voice was strained, almost pleading. "After the baptism. After things settled. I was going to fix it." "But you didn't fix it," Ellen said. "You just kept talking. And you thought I wouldn't notice. Or you thought I wouldn't say anything," she stood. "But I did notice. And I did say something. To the right people. And now you have to deal with the consequences." She walked past him, went upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. She got ready for bed slowly, methodically, brushing her teeth, washing her face, changing into her pajamas. When she climbed into bed, Martin still hadn't come upstairs. Ellen turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. She felt calm, clear. She had done what needed to be done. And tomorrow was the baptism. Sunday, April 30th, arrived bright and clear. Ellen woke at 6, dressed in a pale blue dress and low heels, and went downstairs. Martin was already in the kitchen, dressed in his deacon's vestments, white alb, stole, cincture. They didn't speak. They left the house separately. Ellen arrived at St. Timothy's at 8:30. Rachel was already there, standing outside the sanctuary with the baby in her arms. David stood beside her, holding a diaper bag and looking tired. Rachel saw Ellen and smiled. "Hi, Mom." Ellen walked over and kissed her daughter's cheek. "He looks beautiful." The baby was dressed in the christening gown Ellen's mother had sewn, white cotton with tiny pearl buttons, hand-stitched lace, delicate and perfect. Rachel had ironed it carefully that morning. Ellen reached out and touched the baby's hand. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. Inside the sanctuary, Paul Richter was setting up the sound system. Paul was 46, the volunteer audiovisual coordinator, a conscientious man who worked as an HVAC technician during the week and spent his weekends at the church making sure every microphone worked, every speaker was balanced, every playlist was organized. He was meticulous, literal, and deeply concerned with getting things right. Ellen had emailed him the week before with the hymn selection and the scripture reading for the baptism. Paul had confirmed receipt and said he'd have everything ready. Now, Paul was standing at the control booth in the back of the sanctuary, running through his checklist. Ellen could see him tapping on the tablet he used to control the sound system, adjusting levels, testing connections. He looked focused, calm, and prepared. Ellen walked up the side aisle and took her seat in the third pew. Rachel and David sat beside her. Martin stood near the altar, speaking quietly with Father Luis. Other parishioners began to arrive, aunts, uncles, friends, the godparents Rachel had chosen. The sanctuary filled slowly. At 9 o'clock, the organist began the prelude, a Bach piece, contemplative and beautiful. The congregation settled into their seats. Ellen held Rachel's hand. The baby made soft cooing sounds. Father Luis stepped forward to the microphone at the front of the sanctuary. He welcomed everyone, explained the structure of the baptism liturgy, and gestured toward the baptismal font, a large marble basin near the altar. "Let us begin," Father Luis said, "with a song of welcome for this child." He nodded toward Paul in the back. Paul pressed the button on his tablet to cue the baptism welcome track. There was a brief pause, maybe half a second, while the system loaded the file. Then the speakers crackled slightly, and a voice filled the sanctuary. Martin's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. I moved it until after the baptism. The words hung in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Paul's face went white. His hand shot out and hit the stop button, cutting the sound off abruptly. He frantically swiped at the tablet, pulling up the correct file, and hit play. The hymn began, "Joyful, joyful, we adore thee," swelling through the speakers, filling the space with organ and choir. But the silence had already happened. The words had already been spoken. Ellen felt Rachel tense beside her. She heard whispers starting in the rows behind them. She saw heads turning, people glancing at each other, at Martin, at her. Thomas Venn, the auditor, was sitting near the side door. Ellen saw him take out a small notebook and write something down. Ellen didn't look at Martin. She kept her hand on Rachel's shoulder and her eyes on the baby. Father Luis continued with the liturgy, his voice steady and calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. He blessed the water. He said the prayers. Rachel carried the baby to the front. Father Luis poured the water over the baby's forehead once, twice, 3 times. "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The baby didn't cry. He just blinked, startled by the cool water, then relaxed in Rachel's arms. The congregation responded with the traditional affirmations. The hymn ended. Father Luis invited everyone to stand for the final blessing. The Mass continued as planned. But the air in the room had changed. People whispered quietly. Eyes kept drifting toward Martin, toward Ellen, toward Paul, who looked like he wanted to disappear. After the service, people gathered in the parish hall for coffee and cake. Ellen stood near the refreshments table, holding the baby while Rachel spoke to relatives who had traveled from out of town. David was talking to his parents near the coffee urn. Ellen bounced the baby gently, watching him grab at the string of pearls she was wearing. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned. Paul was standing there, his face stricken, his hands clenched at his sides. "Mrs. Hale, I'm so sorry. I don't know how that happened. I built the playlist from the media directory like I always do. I pulled everything that was labeled for today's service. I didn't check every file individually. I just assumed. He stopped, swallowing hard. It was my fault. I should have been more careful. Ellen looked at him calmly. It's all right, Paul. It's not, Paul said. It was a terrible mistake. In front of everyone. During the baptism. Ellen shifted the baby to her other arm. Paul, mistakes happen. Sometimes they're how the truth gets out. You didn't do anything wrong. You just pressed a button. The file shouldn't have been in that folder in the first place. Paul stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. I don't understand. You don't need to, Ellen said gently. It's all right. Really. Paul nodded slowly, still looking confused and guilty, then walked away. Ellen watched him go, then looked back down at the baby. He was staring up at her with wide blue eyes, completely oblivious to everything that had just happened. Ellen kissed his forehead and handed him back to Rachel. Mom, what was that? Rachel asked quietly. What did we just hear? The truth, Ellen said simply. Come on. Let's get some cake. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation unfolded quietly, without drama or spectacle. It moved through forms and phone calls and official requests. Ellen didn't hear directly from Thomas Venn, but she heard from Father Luis, who called her every few days to update her on the progress. The diocese requested full bank statements for every discretionary account, Father Luis told her on a Wednesday afternoon in early May. They're cross-referencing everything against the disbursement logs. And Ellen, there are discrepancies. A lot of them. What kind of discrepancies? Ellen asked. She was sitting at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. Withdrawals that don't match the logs, Father Luis said. Cash withdrawals. Large ones. Right before the weekend. Football weekends, specifically. And there's a checking account Martin opened in February. A personal account, not a parish account. Deposits from the Shepherd's Fund were going into it. Ellen closed her eyes. How much total? $12,400, Father Luis said quietly. Since January. Ellen opened her eyes and stared out the window. The lilacs were past their peak now, the purple blooms fading to brown, petals scattered across the grass. What happens now? Diocesan Council is calling him tomorrow, Father Luis said. They're going to ask him to resign from the Finance Committee. If he doesn't resign voluntarily, they'll remove him. And they want full restitution, every dollar, or they'll refer the matter to law enforcement. Will they really do that? Ellen asked. The diocese doesn't let this kind of thing go, Ellen, Father Luis said. They can't. It undermines everything. If they don't take action, it looks like they condone it. They'll push for restitution. They'll ban him from handling parish finances anywhere in the diocese, and if he doesn't cooperate, they'll file charges. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Thank you for telling me, Father. I'm sorry this happened, Father Luis said. I'm sorry for all of it. Don't be, Ellen said. I'm not. The next day, Thursday, Diocesan Council called the house. Ellen was in the kitchen when the phone rang. She answered and heard a professional female voice say, Mrs. Hale? This is Margaret Chen from the Diocesan Legal Office. I need to speak with your husband regarding the ongoing financial review. He's upstairs, Ellen said. I'll get him. She carried the phone upstairs and handed it to Martin, who was sitting at his desk staring at his computer screen. It's the diocese, she said. He took the phone without looking at her. Ellen went back downstairs and closed the kitchen door. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table, waiting. 30 minutes later, Martin came downstairs. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. He set the phone on the counter and looked at Ellen. They want me to resign. Ellen didn't respond. She just looked at him, waiting. From the Finance Committee, Martin continued. And they want restitution. Full restitution. $12,400. By the end of the month or they'll file charges. Then resign, Ellen said. And pay it back. Ellen, I don't have $12,000, Martin said. His voice was strained, almost breaking. Not liquid. It's tied up in, he stopped. In what? Ellen asked. In the LLC? In the properties you were trying to buy? In whatever you were planning with Jennifer Alston or M&J Holdings or whoever the hell you've been working with. Martin sat down at the table. He put his head in his hands. Ellen, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, Ellen said. And now you have to fix it. Resign. Pay it back. Sign whatever they want you to sign. And us? Martin asked, looking up at her. What about us? Ellen stood and walked to the counter. She opened the drawer beneath the dish towels, took out a manila folder, and placed it on the table in front of him. Inside were the separation papers her attorney had drafted 2 weeks earlier. I filed for legal separation last Monday. Financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The papers are being served next week. You can either sign them voluntarily or contest them. But either way, this marriage is over. Martin stared at the folder. Ellen. If you don't sign them, Ellen continued, her voice calm and measured, I'll add adultery to the filing. And I'll subpoena your bank records, your LLC records, your property records, everything. And I'll make sure the diocese gets copies of all of it. So I suggest you sign. Martin opened the folder with shaking hands. He read through the first page, then the second. Then he picked up the pen Ellen had placed on top of the papers and signed on the line marked Respondent. Ellen took the folder, checked the signature, and placed it back in the drawer. You have until Friday to sign the restitution agreement with the diocese, Ellen said. After that, you're on your own. She walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and got into her car. She drove to Rachel's apartment and knocked on the door. Rachel opened it, the baby on her hip, and took one look at Ellen's face. Mom, what happened? I left your father, Ellen said. Rachel stepped aside and let her in. Ellen walked to the couch and sat down. Rachel sat beside her, shifting the baby to her other hip. Are you okay? I'm fine, Ellen said. I'm better than fine. I'm clear. Rachel put her arm around her. Do you want to stay here tonight? No, Ellen said. I just wanted to see you. And him. She reached out and touched the baby's cheek. He turned toward her and smiled, a big, gummy smile that made her chest ache. I'm okay. I promise. Rachel held her for a long time. Then Ellen stood, kissed the baby's forehead, and drove back home. When she got there, Martin's car was gone. Ellen unlocked the door, walked through the quiet house, and went straight to the dining room. She moved her mother's buffet back to its original position against the wall, pushed it carefully until it was centered, then polished it with lemon oil until the wood gleamed. She set out the good dishes, the ones her mother had left her, and made herself dinner. She ate at the table alone. The house was quiet. The light came through the lace curtains and caught the dust in the air, making it shimmer like snow that never landed. By mid-May, Martin had signed everything. The restitution agreement, the resignation letter, the separation papers. The diocesan council sent Ellen a copy of the signed documents along with a formal letter stating that Martin J. Hale was barred from serving in any financial capacity in any parish within the Diocese of Cincinnati. The resignation letter, brief and procedural, cited health reasons. No one at the parish asked follow-up questions. People accepted it with polite nods and moved on. Ellen attended Mass the following Sunday and sat in her usual pew, third row from the front on the left side. Father Luis saw her and nodded from the altar. Ellen nodded back. After Mass, a few people approached her to ask how she was doing. Ellen said she was fine, thanked them for their concern, and went home. No one mentioned the audio. No one asked about Martin. The congregation, like most congregations, understood that some things were better left unspoken. On June 2nd, a notice appeared on the parish office door. It was printed on official diocesan letterhead, laminated, and mounted with clear packing tape. Ellen read it on her way to print the bulletin. Sacramental privacy policy. In accordance with diocesan standards, all confessional spaces at St. Timothy's Catholic Church are now fully isolated from audio and communication systems. No recordings of any kind are made, stored, or transmitted. The audio/visual system has been replaced as of June 2023. All previous testing files have been permanently deleted. For questions, contact the Office of the Auditor, Diocese of Cincinnati. Ellen read it twice, then unlocked the office and went inside. The old computer was gone. A new one sat in its place, sleek and modern with a flat screen and a wireless keyboard. Ellen turned it on. The desktop was blank except for the standard diocesan software suite. The maintenance folder no longer existed. The file was gone. Ellen sat down, opened the bulletin template, made the weekly updates, and printed 60 copies. She stacked them on the counter, locked the office, and went home. The separation order was finalized in August. Ellen's attorney called to tell her the judge had signed it that morning. "You did everything right," Margaret Foss said. "Clean documentation. Proper notice. Protected assets." The judge appreciated the thoroughness. "Thank you," Ellen said. "What are you going to do now?" Margaret asked. Ellen looked around her kitchen, the clean counters, the organized cabinets, the dining room visible through the doorway with her mother's buffet gleaming against the wall. "I'm going to live my life," she said. "Quietly. On my own terms." "Good for you," Margaret said. Ellen hung up and sat at the table for a while, thinking. Then she stood, got her purse, and drove to the bank. Linda Cho met her in the same glass-walled office where they'd met 4 months earlier. "Ellen, good to see you. What can I help with?" "I want to remove the joint access from the trust account permanently," Ellen said. "Make it individual only. My name. No one else." Linda nodded. "I can do that today." She pulled up the account, made the changes, and printed a confirmation page. "The account is now solely in your name. No joint access. No secondary authorization. Just you." Ellen took the page and folded it carefully. "Thank you, Linda." She drove home and placed the confirmation page in a folder she'd labeled New Documents. Then she went into the dining room and stood in front of the buffet. She ran her hand along the polished wood, feeling the smooth surface, the grain, the history embedded in every inch. This had been her grandmother's, then her mother's, now hers. Truly hers. No one could touch it. No one could take it. It was hers to keep, to care for, to pass on when the time came. By autumn, the air thinned into that bright Ohio blue, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper, clearer. The leaves turned red and gold. The temperature dropped. The world prepared for winter. Ellen fell into a new routine: dinners at her own table, mornings at the church office, Tuesdays and Thursdays at Rachel's. She started hosting Sunday lunches again, just her and Rachel and David and the baby. They would sit at the dining table together, eating simply, talking quietly, watching the baby smash peas into his high chair tray and laugh at the mess. One Saturday in early November, Ellen was at the grocery store, standing in the produce section comparing apples, when Paul Richter appeared beside her. He looked nervous, apologetic, the same way he'd looked at the baptism reception 6 months earlier. "Mrs. Maris." Ellen looked up. "Paul. How are you?" "I'm okay," he said. I wanted to say again, I'm sorry about what happened at the baptism. I know I've apologized before, but it still bothers me. I should have been more careful." Ellen set down the apple she'd been holding. "Paul, you didn't do anything wrong. You pressed play on a file that was in the wrong folder. That's not your fault. Someone put it there. Someone recorded it. Someone forgot to delete it. But that's not on you." "But it caused so much trouble," Paul said. Ellen looked at him steadily. "It didn't cause trouble. It revealed it. There's a difference. The trouble was already there. You just helped bring it to light." Paul nodded slowly, processing this. "Okay, thank you." Ellen picked up the apple and placed it in her cart. "Take care, Paul." She finished her shopping, checked out, and drove home. When she got there, she unpacked the groceries, then sat down at the kitchen table with a blank card and a pen. She wrote a short note to Thomas Venn. "Dear Mr. Venn, thank you for conducting the financial review at St. Timothy's with such care and professionalism. Your thoroughness ensured that the situation was handled properly and fairly. I appreciate the time you took and the integrity you brought to the process. Respectfully, Ellen Maris." She addressed the envelope, stamped it, and walked it out to the mailbox. The air was cool, the leaves bright. Ellen stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at her house, small, plain, ordinary, hers. She had lived there for 58 years. She had been born a few miles away. She had raised her daughter there. She had buried her mother from that front porch. And now she stood there alone, no longer married, no longer carrying the weight of someone else's choices. The house was hers. The trust was hers. The life inside those walls was hers. And that was enough. In late November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Ellen was on the living room floor with her grandson. He was 10 months old now, pulling himself up on the coffee table, wobbling on his feet, taking 1 or 2 steps before falling back onto his bottom. Every time he fell, he looked at Ellen with wide, surprised eyes, then laughed. Ellen laughed too, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, her hands ready to catch him if he fell too hard. Rachel came in from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Ellen and sat down on the floor beside her. "He's getting so strong." "He is," Ellen said. She took a sip of tea, watching the baby pull himself up again, this time making it 3 steps before sitting down hard. He clapped for himself. Ellen clapped too. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Rachel said. "Are you okay?" Ellen asked. "With everything that happened? With your father?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, watching her son. Then she said, "I'm sad about it. Sad that he made those choices. Sad that it ended the way it did. But I'm also proud of you. You didn't let it go. You didn't ignore it. You just handled it." "I had to," Ellen said. "It was my mother's money. Her trust. Her work. I couldn't let him take that." "I know," Rachel said. "And you didn't. You got it back. You protected yourself. And you did it without destroying yourself in the process." Ellen looked at her daughter. "I'm sorry you had to see all of that." "I'm not," Rachel said. "I needed to see it. I needed to know that you could stand up for yourself. That you wouldn't just accept it. My whole life, I'd seen you and Dad together, and I thought that was what marriage looked like. Quiet. Careful. Not asking too many questions. But watching you these past few months, I realized that's not strength. Real strength is knowing when something's wrong and doing something about it." Ellen reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. "Thank you." "For what?" Rachel asked. "For understanding," Ellen said. "For not judging me. For being here." Rachel squeezed back. "Always, Mom." They sat together in the warm afternoon light, drinking tea, watching the baby explore the world one wobbly step at a time. Ellen felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from pretending everything is fine. Not the exhausting peace that comes from keeping quiet about things that need to be said. But the deep, steady peace that comes from knowing the truth is out, the accounts are balanced, the silence is finally, blessedly, hers. That night, after Rachel and the baby had gone home, Ellen sat at the dining room table with a cup of tea and looked around the room. The buffet gleamed. The good dishes were put away. The table was set for one. The house was quiet, but not empty. Just quiet. Ellen didn't mind. She had spent years setting the table for 2, speaking in careful tones, measuring her words, watching for signals. Now she set it for herself. She ate when she was hungry. She read when she wanted. She turned off the lights when she was tired. She answered to no one. Ellen stood and carried her cup to the sink. She washed it, dried it, and set it in the cupboard. Then she walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The lilacs were bare now, their branches dark against the evening sky. But they were still there, dormant, waiting. In the spring, they would bloom again, heavy with purple clusters, filling the yard with that thick, sweet scent. Every year, they return. Every year, they bloom. Ellen turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. She got ready for bed slowly, methodically, the same way she did everything now, with care, with attention, with no rush. She lay down in the quiet dark and closed her eyes. She didn't replay the recording. She didn't think about Martin's voice or the 7 seconds in the sanctuary or the look on his face when she handed him the separation papers. She thought about the sound of bathwater running in a small sink, the clink of a cup set down gently on a saucer, the click of the front door when Rachel let herself in. She thought about light through lace, catching dust like snow that falls without sound, without weight, without ever needing to land. Ellen slept well that night. She slept in her own house, in her own bed, with her own name on every account that mattered. And when she woke the next morning, the light was already coming through the lace curtains, soft and clear, illuminating the room she had slept in for 58 years, the room she would sleep in for as long as she chose. The house was hers. The life was hers. The silence was hers. And that was enough. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.